Welcome to Quantum Identity. Yes, it's another podcast where we explore how you've become the you of today and what you've been through to transition from the person that you used to be to the person that you are. And we interview incredible, amazing people, people who have overcome challenges and transformations of their own. They have explored their own dark to find the light. And today I've got someone special on the call with me, all the way from the Swiss Alps in her little chalet log cabin, Louise Legat, who is a transformation coach. And she's done everything. You know, she's got such a big CV, worked with the UN, Impact Hub. She's an NLP master coach. She's written 10 ebooks. She's a holistic therapist. And she spends her time, luckily, between the Swiss Alps and the south of France. It's a pretty good life, I think. And the cool thing about her service and her offer is that she leads transformational retreats for leaders who are looking to step into more meaningful careers. And I'll let you, Louise, introduce yourself a little bit. But what I was curious about was this term, next generation leadership catalyst. That's pretty impressive. I like that. So why don't you tell us and our listeners a little bit more about what you do and what your transformation is?
So hi, anyway, and hello from Switzerland, as you said. For me, I'm, as you said, all about transformation, but not just personal transformation, but also how we actually evolve the world. You know, the world is in an interesting place right now. And what I've been seeing is that maybe the leaders that we currently have, there's a question mark as to whether they're the leaders that are going to take us to where we need to be. And I have now 20 years of experience in working with leaders in corporations, in not-for-profits, and also with social entrepreneurs. So I've kind of been in lots of different environments, both with, in corporations, leaders who are trying to evolve things, social entrepreneurs who are trying to actually create something different in the world, and in the more not-for-profit traditional world, carry on bringing in the change. But one of the questions is, we actually need a different kind of leader. We need a leader that's going to start thinking differently and start challenging us in a different way. So, for example, leaders need to start thinking about how they actually completely disrupt the world that we actually live in, so they can bring new perspectives to what we're doing. So what I'm actually doing is bringing and creating a movement of positive energy leaders who show up in a different way so that they can be real evolution leaders in terms of the world that we're trying to create.
So what does that mean in terms of the leaders that we or you are trying to create? Who defines the type of leader that the world needs? How do we measure what a successful leader looks like in our new world?
So in a way, what I found is that there's a whole lot of leaders who are successful on the outside, but there comes a point in their careers where they feel that what they're doing is pretty meaningless and pretty pointless. Mm-hmm. And it's like there's something that's missing. And what I found is working with those leaders, it's often that they're visionaries, so they don't fit in neatly into the existing system. And what we work on is the fact that maybe they're here to change things. So it's interesting because it's not like they have a clear set of criteria. It's more like they have a wake-up call. And earlier you were talking about this before and after. And I find that there's this point where suddenly they get this feeling inside that they're here for something bigger and they're here for something greater. And so it's about working with them, and it's more that through them emerges new perspectives. They have new ways of looking at the world and new things that they actually want to bring. They just don't think in that same way, that same linear way that we've often thought up until now.
What do you think causes that moment in a leader's journey or career, that where they actually think, you know what, actually I'd like to, my my priorities have changed. I want to do something different. I want to act differently, or I want to make a different type of contribution. Where are they in their career? And what happens at that time to actually push them to challenge the status quo?
Often it's because they've ticked all the boxes of external success. So what happens is that we're brought up to believe that in order to be happy and fulfilled, that we need to tick those boxes. So we get the good degree, we get the good job, and then we start going and moving up the career ladder. And then there comes a point where if people look at us, we've got that good salary, we've got the nice house, we have actually got the nice job title. But what happens is they get to this point where there's something inside that feels that something's not quite right. And sometimes it happens at specific ages. So I've seen a pattern in terms of some of the ages. So at the around 28 to 30, 40, 42, and around 56 to 58. So there's a specific ages where it seems that for something particular reason, it's coming up in a bigger way. Some people believe it's linked to astrology and kind of certain planets that come back into your chart. But ultimately, those are the moments. And so suddenly it's like we've been sold this kind of model of the world where if we tick those boxes, we thought that would be it, that we'd have this amazing feeling inside. And we realized that we crave something that we haven't been taught. It hasn't been talked about in our frame. And so the question is, that's the point when people start to ask a few questions. They try and do the normal things that make them feel happy and have made them feel comfortable in the past, but it's like it's not working anymore. And so over time they start to question everything. And sometimes recognize as the midlife crisis, but it takes more than that. It's more than that. It's looking for something deeper inside ourselves. And what they actually looking for is themselves, because what's happened is they've disconnected from themselves in the chase for success, and they need to start bringing themselves back to work and back to what they do. And that's the place where they become real leaders, not just managers or good soldiers, which maybe they've been up until then.
Mm-hmm. So I can relate to this story a lot because I am that person. I really am. And I've done my own corporate career. And a few years ago, I also came to a point where I thought what I was doing, wasn't going to take care of me in my old age financially. I wasn't interested in more promotions in the same type of businesses. And I found that the more senior I started to get in corporate workplaces, the less impact and contribution I started to have, because your job frequently can become more about keeping your job rather than doing your job. And I was asking about when does that happen? Because I think that time, at least in my experience, the concept of time as a factor in one's career is very significant, because as your career progresses, you have less time to do the things that you were always wanted to do, or lead a more fulfilling life, or make that contribution. And then also, just I would love to get your thoughts on this. I think that there's also maybe a symptom about today's rapidly changing global marketplace, which is changing so fast that the careers of 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago no longer take care of people. And they no longer take care frequently, okay? So I don't know if your clients are 1%ers, millionaires, maybe they are. But there's a whole range of middle management, senior management, people who are on decent salaries compared to the next person, even 100K London salaries. But in reality, you get to a point that when you retire, there is no good pension anymore. You're not earning, even though you're on a high salary, you're not earning enough to take care of your family for 25 plus years of retirement. And so those people who recognize that in their 40s, maybe in their 30s or their 40s, have the ability perhaps to do something about their situation and switch their career into a different trajectory. So I'm wondering, does that resonate at all? Is that the type of people that you work with, or could you tell us more about your client base, your ideal clients?
So I think there's two things. So I had the wake up call very early because I was actually 26, 27.
Mm-hmm.
And in my age group, I was the weirdo. So it was like people were like, what are you doing? Because at that point I decided to create a career on my terms. Maybe actually I'll share a bit my story, because then that will give you a bit about that background. I was a successful lawyer in the City of London. I ticked all the boxes of success. I thought I'd made it. But every morning going into work, I just wanted to cry, and I wanted to not go there. And I just couldn't understand why that was. Ultimately, as a result of a major illness, I was told that I would not be able to walk again. And in that moment, it was a real confronting moment where I asked myself, well, what would I regret if the doctors were right? And I thought it would be not becoming a partner in the law firm that I was working almost 24/7 in. And what actually came was not doing the Inca Trail in Peru. And to my embarrassment, I didn't even know where Peru was on a map. And I remember in that moment thinking, wow, I am so disconnected from myself that the only thing I will regret is doing a trek in a country I can't locate on the map. And I promised myself to live with no regrets. And so it's meant that as a result, I've started from quite a young age to do this very different style of career, which is much more based on what I wanted to do. But initially, I didn't even really know what that was. So it was more like trying to work out a little bit more what was interesting, etc. And then how it relates to your question is from there, because I understood much more of who I really was and what my real strengths were, I did the internal work.
Mm-hmm.
What it actually meant is that I ended up to have jobs created for me. So since that moment and doing a career change, so for example, I went to see the head of HR and he created a job for me in HR. And then from there, my jobs were created for me. Until then, I created my own business. And so what I find is that there's kind of two groups. There's that more 40 to 42 who, I don't know how old you are, but it's kind of that age where suddenly you're kind of going, oh my God, is this it? I'm seeing you. So is this it? And just wondering, yeah, I maybe got 20, 25 more years of work. And then on top of that, as you said, I haven't fully saved and I'm not sure how that's going to look. And the world is changing because we've got artificial intelligence coming in. So there's that group, but there's also, and this group I was surprised about, much more the group now coming through that were my age when I had my wake up call. So that 26 to 28 to late to
wow, that's
late.
so young.
Yeah. And they're coming because they're saying, hey, I'm looking upstream. I don't want that, but I have no idea how to create anything different. So please help me. And I think the other piece about the clients that I have is these are clients who they're the high potentials in corporations often. So they were labeled the leaders of the future. So it is actually a major issue that they're coming and saying, hey, I don't know if I want to carry on in this frame. And again, it is also seeing in terms of the world and what's happening in the world. When I just briefly mentioned artificial intelligence, and I was kind of relaxed about it until I remember seeing, I think it's by 2025, lawyers can actually be replaced by artificial intelligence. And I suddenly realized, oh my God, these are the so-called old professions. You know, the accountants get replaced. And it really had me see the world of work is going to change. But the thing that you can't take away and is unique to a human being is its unique flavor. So in a way, it could mean that it creates a lot more opportunities for people, because they can start to bring more of themselves, more of what makes them human, but also not just generally human, but that specific human. But it means we have to get much more creative about our careers. I see a lot of people say, I'm looking for a job, a box. And a lot of the work I do with my clients is, no, let's look at who you are, and let's maybe even create something that doesn't exist yet. And so that for me is where how we need to start thinking about careers and how we craft them. You know, we don't just fall into them. And it becomes more and more important to do that.
That's so, it really, I feel very emotional talking about this whole journey, transformation, or like the changing nature of work, because many, many, many people don't see it coming. They're in their jobs and the marketplace is changing and the years go by. And like, take marketing. I come from a marketing and digital background, and nobody told you, you don't get a memo, right? And you don't get an email, or you don't see it on the news saying, you know what, we don't need these types of jobs anymore. And even though it's not AI, it is the changing nature of work and the skill set, and companies also inability to train you throughout your career. So if you don't know, and if you don't have the savviness, curiosity, proactivity to go out and find knowledge and pay for training, identify first of all the competencies that you need, the trends of the future, invest in a coach, or go back to I say go back to school with a grain of salt, really, because I thought about doing an MBA myself in my 40s. And then, you know what, I weighed out and I thought, why on earth would I go and pay 60 grand or 100 grand for an MBA that it's not going to equip me with the skills and the thinking that you talk about? It's going to teach me how to get a job, or it's going to teach me how to be part of the current or even previous system of way of working, but it's not going to teach me with the skills of the new economy, and that, you nailed it, is creativity and thinking. And so how do you teach your clients to think differently and to be more creative about what they want to do, how they want to do it, what they can offer the workplace, but so you're not poor? Because the reason we have jobs is that we don't want to be poor. We're competent, smart people, and we want to earn a good living as well. So how do you work with people to achieve what's true to themselves in the workplace?
So there's different levels of that. So first of all, there's three big pillars that we work with. And because for me, it's exactly what you said. I couldn't understand why somebody had decided that on the one hand, we could have what we call more calling or meaningful work, but not earn very much, because that's been a bit the frame we've been in. Or this idea of we're going to earn lots of money, but excuse my language, but we can screw the world kind of thing. So there's been a bit of that.
Quantum identity, you can curse, and we don't censor anything here.
So for me, it's like, I don't know who invented that split, but it wasn't a very, it was somebody for me that lacked a bit of imagination, because ultimately it's like, why can't we have those both? So it's been a bit, my last 20 years for me, a bit of a study in that. And what I found is that people focus too much on location. So they focused on what's the next box they're going to fit into. So they usually have things in their mind, which are, So maybe I'm going to change career, or I'm going to become a coach, or I'm going to set up my own business, or I'm going to go and work for an NGO, or maybe I'll take a sabbatical or an MBA. That's kind of some of the options in those career pivotal moments. But what they don't work on enough is that connection to themselves, because the root cause of the issue is that they disconnected from themselves in the first place, because that's what they were taught to do, to jump higher based on the external barometers, but not to fully bring themselves to what they were doing. And often unconsciously, we even believe that that's dangerous to do, to bring ourselves fully to our work and that full level of self-expression. So in terms of mastery, the first is authentic leadership, which is really reconnecting to your inspiration so you can be inspired from the inside and not need kind of other people to just motivate you because they're going to give you the next promotion or the next sexy job title. But you know what drives you from the inside. So that's the first piece. The second bit is you're going to have to sell something at some point, whether it's within a company or within your own business. And for me, the key to that is becoming a trusted advisor, where you understand what your true value is because you know what your real strengths are. So not just what you're good at, but also what you're good at and naturally energizes you. Because sometimes we've just learned to be good at certain things, but it doesn't mean it's aligned to our innate potential. Mm-hmm. Now, again, that's all very well. Some people are aligned to that, but then they don't package it in a way that anybody would trust them to receive the service from. So it's important to understand what it is you have to offer, to nurture that. If you're going to invest in something, then invest in courses that build your credibility and your skill set in that. And then really be able to connect to what other people need, the people that you'd want to work with. What is it that they really need? What are the problems they really want to solve? Because ultimately that's what people pay for. And then the last piece, which is connected to people who want to have that positive impact, and this is a bit that we don't really talk about enough, is that if you're really going to use your work to evolve the world, then you're going to have to bring something that's different. And when I've had different levels of my business, but there was one point where I realized that I wanted to evolve the world, that it was a bit complicated in terms of working out how to sell something around that, because most of the people I was talking to couldn't fully understand what I was trying to offer because it was actually out of sync with what they thought they needed. So I would talk, and some people who've tried to evolve the world may know what I'm talking about. They speak, and then the other people look at them as if they're from a different planet. And so there's a whole set of skills there, which is what I call being an evolution agent. Understanding that if you're going to bring something interesting, something that's truly novel and transformational, people probably won't get it initially. And you have to be the one who does the work in order to be able to articulate it, to reach them, to inspire them to a new possibility. And then you can offer whatever value add you want to in that context. So it's about working with those three pillars, but the essence of it is saying to people, the core is that you need to learn to touch the world with your unique presence. So understand what your true presence is and package that in a way that really truly adds value to a group of people. And at the same time, be interesting. Don't just be the good soldier. Have some interesting points of view, because that's what makes you a real leader. And that is what will attract naturally your movement of people who will be inspired by what you're doing and ultimately will buy your services. Again, and that works within a company or if you have your own business. It's always the same principles.
Hey, I'm letting that sink in a little bit. It's very, very relevant to my own journey as well. I think that will help a lot of people as well. I wanted to ask you, what is an intrapreneur?
An intrapreneur. Okay. It's someone who's working in an organization and who wants to have a positive impact on the world through the organization. So it's someone who's usually working in the corporate environment. Mm-hmm. And because we've had this split in the corporate environment where it's been much more goals driven, and
Yeah.
we've been looking much more at shareholders, profits, basically the numbers. And so there's people who have been yearning to have more impact, and they've been looking at different ways to do that. So you've had the kind of whole corporate social responsibility movement, but ultimately the entrepreneurs, what they're trying to do is to create new business models, so it's actually products that you can start to sell, that become an integral part of the business. Corporate social responsibility was much more, you'd have the main business, and then, okay, I'm going to be a bit cynical there. There was a bit of paying off your karma on the side, where it would be like, let's do some nice initiatives on the side. But there would be the separation between business and how we do business and what we sell, and then these nice, happy initiatives that we would do on the side.
Mm-hmm.
If you look, actually, Nike is quite interesting at the moment, because it's trying to really start to integrate having different levels of messaging in society. So, for example, around football and women, and its products. And I was reading just today that as a result, the women's football shirt that's sold by Nike, because at the moment there's some championships around that, is the best selling ever. Based on whether it's men's football or women's football, but it's the best-selling ever shirt that's happened. So basically the entrepreneurs are the ones who are trying to catalyze those movements of integrating the business models with that positive impact.
Right. Okay. Have you ever worked in, or do you ever work with people who are stuck in a quote unquote toxic work environment?
A lot.
And like, what are the common traits of a toxic work environment? What does that mean to be in a toxic work environment?
For me, there's two things around that. And I think, because in terms of toxics, there's the external circumstances that are in place, so that are making it difficult. So anything, extreme toxicism would be bullying.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, it's a place where you're not, in its essence, it's a place where you're not valued, and you're not given the things that you need in order to really thrive and really fulfill your potential. And there's varying degrees on that. I see a lot of workplaces, it's not that they're consciously doing that. They're just a bit apathetic around it, or they don't fully understand what it takes. So part of the way we've built our businesses is to focus, again, a lot on the numbers. And there's been, again, this separation that the well-being of employees was this separate thing, whereas more and more we're seeing that the well-being of employees is actually intricately connected to their performance, which ultimately then the targets and things that they meet, or the creativity that they have. But I think there's one piece, again, that sometimes we don't talk about, is that growing up, we haven't all had the best role models about how to do relationships. And so we are in the environments, but on top of that, it's like we're not being particularly healthy either, because we don't feel, or we don't have the communication tools, or even the internal tools to even know what we need. Mm-hmm. So what I've known in corporations is that, yes, we talk with the managers, etc., around shifting the environment, but actually a lot of transformation can happen just by empowering people to start to connect to what's really going on, what do they really need, how do their emotions give them messages around what they can create that would be better for them, and then how to have the communication tools to influence that. So it is, yes, that the environments are toxic, and I'm not going to go into bullying and harassment and things like that. I mean, that's just extreme toxicism. But there's just this latent toxicism about not really fully valuing people. But actually, if we don't value ourselves, and we don't train people to value ourselves, then that's also part of the problem. And that's something we can actually do something about. So I say to people, start with yourself, start learning those new tools, because that's maybe sometimes less scary than having to make a big jump, for example, to change everything. So change yourself, because then when you'll go to the new environment, at least you won't recreate what you've experienced in this environment.
Yeah, change yourself. Absolutely, because that your own perception of the situation is a major contributor to how you feel, isn't it? So what I know that you do these retreats for leaders, new leaders. What goes on in one of your retreats?
So I lead different retreats. I have, what I've done so for corporations is led kind of long retreats, like kind of 10 days, twice 5-day retreats, all around inspirational and transformational leadership. And the retreats I'm leading now, I also lead them in my, as you said, my nice new chalet in the Swiss Alps. Ultimately, it's all about those kind of themes and that positive energy leadership theme. But it's about really understanding what transformation takes. Because in my experience, people don't fully understand what that means. And the core of it is that there's a place where we're all prisoners of ourselves, actually, and of the conditioning that we have built growing up. So as we grow up, the way I see it is that we have this desire to self-express, so to show up as who we really are and with our true talents, our true points of view, etc. But then we encounter the world, and sometimes the world says, oh, this is great, we love you when you're like this. And so in that sense, we can continue to express our potential. But then what happens is that in other experience, and I think we've all experienced that, is we try and bring ourselves, and we either get rejected or people just, ignore us. And so what happens is we get the feedback that it's not okay to be ourselves. And at the core of it, our brain is wired to be and to stay a member of the tribe. So actually to fit in, because it was part of our survival mechanism. In the olden days, if we're part of the tribe, we get fed. And so we end up in this inner conflict, which is I can either be me or I can get fed and be loved and be part of the tribe. And so these mechanisms, I know they're created sometimes when we're 2 years old, and we might be 40 and we're still acting out the mechanism that we built when we were 2.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if you want to be an inspiring leader and you're still acting from your 2-year-old, you might have a few issues that are going to come up, or because ultimately we've gained a lot more resources as an adult, that we've still got this frame in our mind that's stopping us from fully expressing ourselves. So a lot of the retreats are about understanding what were these patterns that we created when we were younger, so that we can make new choices now. It's like literally getting a software update in our brain to be able to start to, instead of playing out those old stories, to bring our full potential to the party. So it's like reclaiming new aspects of potential and then seeing how we can start to express those and integrate those into our work and our leadership.
And how long does that take?
So there's awareness, and that can be a split second. And then there's the discipline of what I call living consciously, living awake. So, and I was just working on that with a client just yesterday, where I had to be very clear around some of the patterns, and it happens quite regularly, because they are so unconscious, and it's like, okay, look in that mirror. And so, these days I always have a coach, but I needed a lot more support in the past to be able to stick with that. So, what I've done with retreats is actually a lot of my programs these days, they're a combination of retreats and then in between group coaching. So they have the accountability and the mirror of me as the coach, but also within a group as to seeing some of those patterns. But they know each time that every 2 weeks there's a place to come to where they're going to be accountable around that. So as I said, the awareness can take a split instant. The discipline to keep overriding the system, to keep showing up, is, I call that a lifetime's kind of work. But some patterns, the patterns I'm working on now are not the same patterns that I was working on 10 years ago. Yeah. So every time you decide to go to another level of self-expression, you'll just revisit or visit or get to become aware of some new patterns. And then it becomes just a way of life where you continuously evolve beyond them. But
Yeah.
that for me is true freedom. And it's truly living your life. And I had a near-death experience which also confirmed that. So that kind of helped.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your near-death experience?
If you like. So for me, it was a real bookend to my original illness, in that it was 14 years later. So I had 14 years of experimenting on lots of different ways of doing work, from creating my own company. I did that. I even relocated to Switzerland, so I did that twice. I worked in the social enterprise, but I think for a long time I was still thinking it was a bit this external thing that I was still trying to create. And what happened was I got sick, and I collapsed. And when I lost consciousness, and when I woke up, I had all the signs of a stroke. Mm-hmm. It turned out it wasn't, but at that time we didn't know. So I was rushed into the hospital, and I was rushed into intensive care. And I was basically told to say goodbye to my partner. I was losing the ability to speak properly. I couldn't coordinate my left and my right side. And so I literally didn't know if I would know my name the next time I would see him or where I would be. And I just remember in that moment thinking, oh my God, this is it again. this is it maybe. And that question came again, which is, so Louise, what will you regret? And this time what came was that there was nothing I would regret. But what was interesting was that I understood why this time. And it was like there was a trapdoor in my mind that opened, and it was like a checklist in which I could assess my life. And there was just 3 sets of questions that came. And the first one was, have you experienced enough joy? And the measure of that was whether I'd done enough of what my heart truly wanted to do. The second was I at peace? And the test for that was, had I contributed enough of my true self? And the last piece was, had I loved enough? And that was about valuing and appreciating myself, and valuing and appreciating others in my life, and making sure that I actually expressed that. And what I learned in that is that it is this constant work of self-expression. And often we're not educated to follow our heart or our joy. That's not what I was. I don't know how you were taught about how you're going to build your career, but I was told there were 3 professions. There was law, accountancy, and being a doctor. That was my grandfather, who was a doctor. So, there wasn't any joy discussion. Contributing my true self, when I started out, I didn't even know who she was, the true self piece. I had to do the work to access that. And then the last piece is, the loving, being loving is all about emotional intelligence, which we now know is an integral part of work. But when I started 20 years ago and started teaching that, again, people were like, what the hell's that? Let's talk about emotions. So it really does come down to, are we willing to overcome our conditioning and to follow that joy, to give that unique contribution that only us could do, and to showing up as being that presence of love on the planet, which we desperately need these days. So that was my learning from the near-death experience.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's very powerful stuff. People don't realize, first of all, that they have conditioning, and that they can change their conditioning with time and work, the right type of work. That's what many entrepreneurs are well aware of. They learn it the hard way, because being an entrepreneur, you go through so much shit day in and day out, that if you don't change your mind, you won't survive 2 seconds out there. And so there's this desire and this search to constantly feel better, perform better, think better. That's why I love entrepreneurs, and they, you know, when you're in a corporate career, you're not really taught to think for yourself. In fact, I would argue that it doesn't help your career really to think for yourself. No matter how great your vision and inspiring or innovative your thoughts may be, it doesn't work, man. There's very few, not I'm generalizing obviously, but there's probably just few companies in the world where you're embraced and rewarded for being a free thinker. Even the companies that promote themselves as being in that way. All right, so I just wanted to ask you lastly, um, if you could go back 10, 20 years and speak to your younger self, you know, when you were just the spring chicken, what would you say to your younger self?
Um, I was quite feisty when I was in my teenage years, and so what I would say to my younger self is trust yourself, because even though some of the stuff you say seems weird, you know what you're doing. And partly, for example, I remember, so I'm half French, and I there came a point at the end of my schooling where I was accepted in a big school, in a very prestigious school in Paris, to continue my studies. And I'll always remember a conversation where I had with my dad, where he thought like this was the holy grail, like he couldn't believe, you know, this is really great. And I turned around to him and I said, I'm not going. And he said to me, what do you mean you're not going? And I
What?
said, yeah, exactly. Um, they're not going to make me into the kind of leader I want to be. Now, I was 17 years old. As I said that, I remember thinking to myself, what the hell are you talking about? But I had this huge conviction that in myself that no, this wasn't the place. And so I said to him, I need to go to an English university because they'll teach me to think for myself. And that's what I need. And that's what I did. He wasn't very happy about it. But I think there was this kind of place where I felt like I was a bit this rebel without a cause. And I would just say to her, you actually do know what you're doing. Trust yourself.
Trust yourself. That's a nice one. And for anyone out there listening to this podcast who is inspired by your story, your coaching journey, and you know the possibilities, what can they take away from this? What would you say to them?
Now is the time. If you want to have a meaningful work and a positive impact, look at the world. You know, I think people still think that we're waiting for this time to come when it'll come to change the world. The time is now. We've got work to do. So I know it's not comfortable, and I'm going to be clear. I'm not one of those coaches that are going to tell you it's easy, and because you're going to become an entrepreneur or you're going to start having a positive impact, that you're going to end up in la la land where it's all magical and beautiful. It's probably the hardest journey you're going to take, just what you said before. The entrepreneurial journey is hard, and actually if you stay in corporations, and you tend to have to become a transformation agent, which is what I call working behind enemy lines, where you're having to evolve their thinking and you have to learn the tools for that. Both those roles are hard, but they're the most worthwhile thing that you'll ever do, because you will feel truly alive. And I believe you'll actually really make your life worthwhile, because you'll do what you're here for. And the world needs you right now. I don't believe that the cavalry's coming. I think we are the cavalry. So if you feel called to have a positive impact, now is your time. And whether you work with me or somebody else, just do the work so you can show up. Because if we do, enough of us show up, we will change things. The energy is there. There are some changes that are happening. I just saw a post by Paul Pullman, ex-CEO of Unilever, who's creating a team to really make the corporates accountable around meeting the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. So the world is starting to change. There are cracks, and if you're going to do anything at any time, then yeah, this is now.
Thank you, Louise Legat. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. It's been great to dive a bit deeper into what you're all about, your own personal transformation and the business transformation that you work with your clients to achieve. So thank you very much. I'll pop in all sorts of links and resources in this video so you can get in touch with Louise if you like. And have a great day, have a great journey, and enjoy the transformation process.